Friday, the 9th of February 1945, was a classically British day. It was cold, gusty, overcast, and sprinkling. Perfection. Flight Lieutenant Neil Cox climbed into the cockpit of Spitfire AB 910, nicknamed T for Trouble. The aircraft had flown in the Dieppe raid and D-Day, and had earned its reputation through having every misadventure a perverse imagination could devise for the bedevilment of her ground crew. Don't worry, she always brings them back alive. The duty controller orders rough weather procedures to commence. One of these procedures is for a member of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force to sit on the tail of a Spitfire, to balance it so that a gust of wind doesn't tip it on its nose. Dutifully, Margaret Horton jumps on the aircraft as it begins to taxi. Unfortunately, the pilot Cox didn't receive the order and, once in position, unleashes the full 1400 horsepower of the Spitfire, taking to the air. Margaret flung herself across the tail and attempted to move the elevator to try and get the pilot's attention. Try as she might, it remains unmoving. That's not to say that she was going completely unnoticed. Upon taking off, the ground crew rushed to the control tower and told them what had happened. Cox also noted that he was experiencing more drag than normal, and being unable to see the tail of his plane from the cockpit, was unable to determine the source. The control tower told Cox to make a tight circuit and land immediately. However, they never told him why, thinking that if Cox knew, it might make him panic. Back on the tail, and Margaret is holding on by her fingertips. She has no way of knowing if anyone on the ground saw what had happened, and no way to attract the pilot's attention. She comes to the realization that she's going to die. She feels the plane move and a force pushing down on her. Blood rushes to her head, and she blacks out. On the ground, the control tower watches as the Spitfire completes its circuit and comes into land. Margaret regains consciousness to feel the plane dropping. Somehow, despite blacking out, she managed to remain on the plane. Cox struggles with the unresponsive controls and tries to line up on the runway, made more difficult by the gusts of wind buffeting his plane. The Spitfire finally lands. As it begins to slow, Margaret's beret is blown off by a gust of wind, and she hops off the tail and runs to get it. There's something wrong with the controls. She's tall and heavy. It wasn't until Cox was in the control tower that he was told why his plane had been acting so oddly. Margaret reportedly had a cigarette, a cup of tea, and got back to work. The next day, as Cox was readying to take off again, he saw Margaret approaching, ready to climb on the tail. I know you don't want to lose your nerve, but please don't get on my tail again.